Okay, hello year 11. I have got your pre-work for Perfect Chinese Children, which is one of the 4 stories you needed to be familiar with from Growing Up Asian in Australia. So there are going to be themes, characters, etc. There's also going to be activities. The idea is that you just think about activities and that we will then complete those activities in class tomorrow. So you should be watching this the night before you have the period on Perfect Chinese Children. Okay. Now my slides aren't going to work. Hang on. All right. So we're looking at Perfect Chinese Children by Vanessa Woods. And so I've written here just sort of in a summary of the text or this story, sometimes the pressure to succeed, to be the perfect Chinese girl and student are almost unbearable. But Vanessa only has to remember her mother's sacrifices to forgive and find love. So this is a story about pressure to be the perfect Chinese student and to perform well academically. This is about the relationship that the author, Vanessa Woods, has with her mother. And this is about the sacrifices that parents make for their children. And then I've put in a little hashtag growing up Asian from, I'm guessing it's like Twitter. And it says, me, Dad, I got the highest result in class. Dad, someone from another school probably did better. Don't be so proud. And this is the whole idea about the pressure on that many Asian children feel to succeed academically from their parents. Growing up. So obviously this text as a whole is all about growing up. So if you think back to your own childhood, I've got 4 questions for you. What ideas do you associate with growing up? What is particular to growing up in Australia? What role did your parents play in your life growing up? And how would being Asian affect this experience? So tomorrow in class, I'm going to ask you each of these questions, and I'm going to ask you to write down a sentence or 2 for each dot point, okay? So make sure you think about that. All right, our second activity in class tomorrow is going to focus on childhood memories. And I'm going to give you an example here. So what I'm going to ask you to do is to choose a place that has a significant meaning for your childhood. I'm going to ask you in writing to describe that place in as much detail as possible. You'll need to consider sights, smells, sounds, and emotions, as well as a narrative about a particular experience. So you're going to think back, you're going to cast your memory back to your childhood, and you're going to think about a particular childhood experience, one very specific one. So I've given you the start of my own, something that you could write something similar, obviously, based on your childhood. So I've said, I can still picture the harsh rays of early morning sun that would beat into the living room. I looked up at the timber slats of the roof. That's a monkey, I whispered to my little sister. Nah, she muttered, a unicorn. We played this game each morning before our parents got up, making images from the markings on the pine slats. This morning we were being extra quiet, knowing that it was a weekend and we weren't allowed upstairs until 8 o'clock. So this is similar to something you could write. You might write a little bit more, all right? And it's focusing on a particular memory. I've put an image in here of, a house with a pine roof. Again, it's just about thinking back to your childhood and trying to think about what childhood is like and what childhood means. All right, so you'll have tomorrow in class 2 minutes to do this, 2 minutes to write a short narrative about one event from your childhood. All right, so what else do we need to know about Perfect Chinese Children? Well, we know it's about divorce because Vanessa's father is Australian and her mother's Chinese, and they divorced. And as a result of this, Vanessa and her brother seemingly grow up with less than other students. And this is something that Vanessa is really conscious of as a child, is the fact that they have less than others. But this story is also about disappointing her mother. Vanessa sort of reminisces on what she did wrong and how her mother was displeased with her. But as an adult, she looks at not only her actions and her feelings, but of course, as you get older, you can begin to empathise with others. So Vanessa looks at how her mother felt as well. what do you need to know about this story, or what do you need to understand? And hopefully you should have understood this just from reading the text, but if not, you need to know that Vanessa is not the perfect Chinese daughter by any means. She is far from, at least according to her mother. You need to understand why Vanessa dislikes her cousin David, who received a 99.9, who seemingly is the perfect Chinese child, you know, and the quote is, it's the ultimate aspiration for any Chinese mother to have a child who is a doctor or a lawyer. Vanessa is not perfect. She states, you know, with regards to her mother, that her own 2 children don't warrant praising. So she's talking about herself and her brother. She steals other children's lunch and erases because she's jealous. Vanessa feels she's never good enough. But in the end, as an adult, Vanessa's able to remember that her mother loves her and that her mother sacrificed quite a lot for her and only ever wanted what was best for her. What about our themes? Well, in this section, in this story, we're looking at parents' expectations and identity. So Vanessa Woods relates the experience of growing up with the pressure to achieve academic excellence. And I've put here this little clip art, and I thought it was really accurate because we call it, you know, being a tiger mum sort of thing. And so this is the cliched image of one daughter, you know, playing piano and the other daughter playing violin. So I think Vanessa, in many ways, perceives her mother as a tiger mother and feels a lot of pressure to succeed, at least academically, because, you know, academic success means money, means wealth, and, you know, these are the things that her mother believes are important. Parents' expectations and identity. So let's unpack this idea a little bit more. So it's about relationships between children and their parents, and this is a big one right throughout the text. The generational divide that seems to be particularly notable for children whose parents are Asian. This relationship that these children, even as adults, that we have with our parents contribute to a sense of belonging and identity, even though it can be, or our relationships with our parents can be quite fraught, can be quite tense. So Perfect Chinese Children is an example of the difficulty many of the authors in this collection identify their parents in having as communicating with their children. So the children can't understand the parents, and parents can't understand the children either. So what is Vanessa Woods trying to say? What's she trying to pass comment on? Well, she's definitely trying to pass a comment on the negative attitudes to interracial marriage. Her father's Australian, her mother's Chinese, and she certainly talks about the racism present there when her mother meets, you know, the father-in-law, and the words he uses to describe her. Then there's the cultural attitudes to divorce and the importance of saving face in Chinese culture. So she talks about the fact that no one they knew was divorced, that certainly many Chinese people were in unhappy marriages, but they would never get divorced because of the importance of being seen to save face. She unpacks some of the stereotypes around being Australian and being Chinese. She talks about alienation, about the fact that she feels like an outsider. In this case, not so much because of the way she looks, but because of the fact her parents don't, or her mother doesn't have a lot of money, and so she can't fit in. She feels like she doesn't belong. So that then ties in with conformity and racism. The importance of education in Chinese culture. Of course, this is a book all about her mother's academic expectations for her, and the fact that when Vanessa gets her ATAR score or a HSC and she calls her mother seems disappointed. The role of food, all right, her mother's love is seen through food, and the role of the family in shaping who we become. Let's unpack these. Where have I got my evidence from to say that these things are present in the text? So if I say that Vanessa Woods explores ideas about negative attitudes to interracial marriage, we've got 3. So we've got negative attitudes from the mother's perspective, from the mother's family's perspective, about the fact that the mother is marrying a white person, a guilo, a ghost. That's page 104. And again, we've got this reverse racism from the Chinese to the white people to the Australians on page 105. Chinese were using chopsticks while Gwilos were still eating with their hands. So certainly her mother's family do not approve of her choice to marry an Australian man. And then the husband's father says, Jesus Christ, Chungali Chow Sheila. That's page 105. So there's this racism coming from the older Australian man as well. So it isn't just the father's Australian family that have a negative attitude, it's also her mother's family, all right? So neither family approve of the choice. Then we've got cultural attitudes to divorce. This is really interesting, the idea that the Chinese spouses had affairs, slept in separate rooms, and barely spoke to each other, but no one ever divorced. It was a matter of saving face. So that her mother is left with a deep sense of shame after her family left them. Her life is in tatters, and she's really worried about the judgment because in Chinese culture, people don't get divorced, it seems. People are more concerned with saving face. All right, the importance of saving face in Chinese culture. So it's all about saving face because you want your family and your children to be seen as better than, or at least worthy of. And so Vanessa's mother has already lost face when her husband leaves her. She's already in a position of shame, all right? So maybe this is why we can think that she places a lot of pressure on Vanessa to succeed, because she feels like in many other aspects she's already failed, so she wants her children to succeed. All right, so Vanessa calls it emotional blackmail, and in many ways it certainly can be seen as emotional blackmail, but we can also understand from the mother's perspective why, because the success of the children, of course, reflects back on the parents. We've got stereotypes. My mother did everything required of a dutiful Chinese wife. Don't talk back from mother's naps. 96 is in 100, so this stereotype that exists around Chinese children and academic performance. It becomes clear we are going the way of Australian children, the ones who don't work as hard, are loud and uncouth, and worst of all, talk back to their parents. All right, so again, interesting that there's also stereotypes from the Chinese mother about what Australians are like and what Australian children are like, and certainly negative stereotypes on both sides. We've got conformity of racism. In our world, interracial marriages are unheard of, page 105. So the fact that her mother is certainly unique in having been married to an Australian man. There's a rhyme going around the playground. The kids pull up the corners of their eyes. So she's talking about like the overt racism that is experienced in the playground for being Asian. And then, of course, what do the other children have that you don't? Her mother asks her, all right? So Vanessa finds that she doesn't belong to either world. She can't conform to the world of the Chinese, but she can't conform to the world of her classmates. And she finds herself stealing, possibly to combat the fact that they're poor and to gain her mother's attention. The importance of education in Chinese culture, a story all about education. His HSC score is her crowning victory, she says of her cousin David. All right, so the fact that the high score is reflective back upon her mother because her mother helped the cousin David. And then you got 88.8, very luck number. You will be rich for sure, says the mother. So seemingly a little bit of positivity when the mother hears of Vanessa's HSC score, seemingly a little bit of positivity that she did better than maybe what her mother expected. But again, the fact that her mother expected that she would do very well. All right. This section of the text is called the folks. If you were reading carefully over the holidays, you would have noticed that each of these stories is divided into sections, and Perfect Chinese Children comes under a section called the folks. So these sections, the different names, draw their names from terminology that is embedded in Anglo-Australian culture. So folks is something that Anglo-Australians would say rather than Asian Australians. And so this is deliberate on behalf of Alice Pong. So she says, Alice Pong, who is the editor, says, I've arranged the anthology around loose themes selected with a certain irony, picking out traits that have been worthy of collective national pride. The battler, the pioneer, the legend, to show these heroic characteristics are not confined to those with white faces and First Fleet heritage. And she talks about the fact that they've important reference points in Australian culture. They're labels about what is unique about being Australian, all right, and how it's different. But they're terms that are generally exclusively used by white Australians, and she's almost trying to reclaim these terms. So a phrase like the folks is very Anglo, but she's trying to say, well, why can't Asian students or Asian children use the word folks to describe their parents as well? So I'm going to ask you tomorrow, and you've got, tonight to ponder on it. Why do you think Alice Pong chose to call this section the folks? And what do you think these stories might focus on? And there's 6 stories in here. There's Perfect Chinese Children, The Asian Disease, Crackers, Conversations with My Parents, The Year of the Rooster, and Are You Different? All right, so have a think, and maybe hopefully you've read all of these stories. Maybe go back and reread some of them and think to yourself, what do they focus on? Why would Alice Pong choose to call this section the folks? So we know that folks is a casual term for parents. All right, maybe you agree or disagree that we would call your parents the folks. All right, maybe things that you would say are associated with it. I've written ambitions for children. Folks makes me think of older parents. Responsibility, friendship, I should have a slash there, slash carers, that they want to be our friends, they also care for us. The expectation, when I talk about my folks, I might talk about the expectation or the pressure I feel from my family to succeed. Affected by their experiences, so that we are influenced by our parents' experiences, that they are our providers, that they teach us ideals and values, and folks maybe suggest a relaxed relationship if we're happy to call our parents our folks. Right, so I've just said here, I've made a note that if I were writing a creative piece, the first thing I would do is pick the section from which I wanted to draw, and then the story. So I'd go through and I'd think to myself, okay, we've studied stories, 4 different stories from different sections. Is there a particular section that I liked when I was reading? Did I really like the folks? And then I would pick a particular story. After I've picked my section of my story, I'd make sure I would read that whole section as well as just that story, so that I've got a better understanding overall, okay? So I'm saying that if you wanted to choose the folks as your story to base your creative piece on, and we'll talk more about how you come to an idea about your creative piece, you might choose to also look at, say, Are You Different by Mia Francis, which is the last story in the folks, and I said it's one that I would highly recommend you reading because I think it really complements the ideas in Perfect Chinese Children. So please do make sure that you read widely. Don't limit yourself, okay? Make sure that you're really familiar. And of course, reading through a story once or twice won't be enough for a creative piece. They're only short stories, so the story you choose to write on, you should read several times. I've copied in here this Time magazine cover, and it says the truth about tiger mums, all right? So I've asked, would you consider Vanessa's mother in Perfect Chinese Children to be a tiger mum? Why or why not? And do you think the pressure felt by Vanessa is exclusively Asian? Why or why not? So have a think about tiger mums, all right? What's going on with tiger mums? So while we're talking about tiger mums and mothers in general, let's talk about the character of the mother in this book. She's really the only other character that is focused on other than Vanessa herself. And I think in many ways the mother is a contradiction, and maybe many mothers are, because I've said here she's cruel and loving. So we see the harsh side to Vanessa's mother, but at the end of the story, there's no doubt that Vanessa is loved. Like, I don't think we ever think to ourselves, oh, her mother never loves her. That's not in question. She just has high expectations. Maybe she is shameful but proud. She's ashamed of the divorce and their lack of money, but she seems proud at the end of what her daughter has been able to achieve. So we would say that Vanessa's mother is the antagonist. She's the one that causes the conflict and moves the plot line along. She creates the tension, okay? So it's the relationship between mother and daughter which is at the heart of this story. Vanessa recalls her mother's own particular breed of emotional terrorism. And this is really interesting. I wonder if any of you would say your parents ever resort to emotional terrorism, which is how Vanessa describes the things that her mother would say and sort of the shame or guilt that her mother would often put back on her. I'm going to give you some writing opportunities, okay? And I'm not saying like sit down right now and write on them. I'm saying when you get to drafting a creative piece, what we've done as staff is we've come up with a particular list of things that you could write on. All right, writing styles, writing opportunities, and we've tried to keep it very specific because we don't want you guys wasting time. Unfortunately, sometimes you spend too much time in the decision-making phase and not enough time in the writing phase. So I'm saying that what you could do with this story is rewrite an existing theme from a different perspective. So in this case, from the perspective of another character. I'm saying it could be a personal reflection because that allows you to write in a thoughtful, considered manner. All right, and that you could use first person narration. So in this case, you might use first person narration and rewrite some of the key events or one of the key events in Perfect Chinese Children from the perspective of Vanessa's mother. So I'm saying, all right, let's look at this story, but let's do it from a different perspective. Whose perspective? Well, to me, it makes sense to do the perspective of Vanessa's mother. So I've chosen two specific points, all right, both from the text, both on page 110. So the first one, you got 88.8, very lucky number, you will be rich for sure. This is what her mother says when Vanessa calls to reveal her HSC score. But Vanessa says there is an odd note in her voice. Unpack this scene, rewrite it from the mother's perspective. The phone rings and the mother picks it up. Is the mother proud? What does she think? All right, we only know Vanessa's perspective. Is the mother's perspective different to this? All right, and then the second one is what do other children have that you don't? Page 110. And this is when Vanessa is caught stealing other children's belongings. And it's all about the Snow White erasers because the mother says, what do other children have that you don't? Vanessa says Snow White erasers. And then she says the next day the Snow White erasers are on the dining room. Her mother tries to make up for what she thinks Vanessa wants. So I said explore the mother's shame here. How would the mother feel when she discovers that Vanessa has been stealing from other children? She would surely feel a deep sense of regret and shame, and she would feel inadequate that she hasn't been able to provide enough for her daughter. I've given you here a sample written intention. So of course you're going to go with flat plus C, but I've just put in here purpose, audience, and context because of course form, I've already told you, we said on the previous slide that we're rewriting a different scene as a personal reflection, right? So purpose, why are you writing this text? Audience, who are you writing it for? Context, what is the setting of your piece? So I won't read this to you, but I would certainly encourage you to read it because remember, once again, your written explanation is going to be worth, I believe it's 10 marks, and a lot of you lost significant marks with your written explanations from your oral presentations. A lot of you had the opportunity to maybe get like B pluses and were marked down to Bs or C pluses because you really hadn't put in enough time or effort to the wording of your written explanation or your written intention. So please take some time to read this and we'll talk more about them in class, but remember it's form, language, audience, purpose, and context. All right, I will see you in class tomorrow. Thanks, Year 11.